Okay, so here we go. We are live from pre-budget workshops 2021 for the CBRM. Um, we are scheduled for the next 3 days to participate in our virtual budget workshop sessions. I want to thank first and foremost all of our staff members who have taken the time to put this information together. I know while I was talking to a couple of different counselors leading up to this is a really important process because it's really our first look at what budget's going to look like. We're not deciding anything right now. This is for educational purposes and informational purposes, but this is going to help us shape what ultimately will be our budget for the next year. This is a time where we'll ask as many questions as possible. We have the wonderful expertise of staff and presenters here to help us make good decisions. So please don't feel like you need to write questions in and ask them later. This is the time that we can have those discussions. If you do want to speak, I will ask that you, as we have been doing with our council meetings, throw a request into the chat and I will do my best to monitor it. Otherwise, I'm going to hand this over to Jen Campbell, our financial guru for the CBRM. And Jen, you can lead us into budget 2021.
Madam Mayor, if I could,
Yes,
I might have just missed that. I was sending off a quick something there, but are you relaxing the timelines here for people if it's an ongoing on one particular department at a time?
Yeah, so this is a workshop, so we don't have the regular kind of limitations of our meetings. I will ask that we be respectful, so like one person's not going to take 20 minutes type thing per presentation, but yep, we are free to chat. There's no limit in terms of how many times you can speak, but yeah, we'll just try to stay within our schedule as much as possible. Okay, Jen, you're up.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mayor. I think Mayor McDougall summarized the workshop format very well. This is a very casual and relaxed discussion on budget. It's your time to ask all of the directors any questions regarding service delivery, regarding costs of the service delivery, taxation. You have a mountain of information that was sent to you last Friday, 193, 194 pages. So I'm sure you spent all long weekend reviewing that information. There is a timetable or a schedule of the presentations, but that is a very loose and relaxed schedule. It's more or less the presentation order. If really the time schedule depends on you and how many questions that you may ask, you're not limited in any way. So feel free to ask as many questions as you want to get the information that you need in order to educate yourselves on our budget process and give you a level of comfort in order to pass a final budget towards the end of March. So yeah, so my presentation will start on revenue later after PVSE presents, but right now I will hand the microphone over to Dave Penny and Lloyd McLeod of Property Valuation Services, and they're going to brief CBRM counselors on CBRM's municipal profile for 2021.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you to the mayor and council for having us today. My name is Lloyd McLeod. I'm the Senior Valuation Manager for Property Valuation Services. And I have with me Dave Penny. Dave is the Regional Manager in our office in Sydney on Bentinck Street. I'm just going to give you a quick overview on PVSC. So, and then I'll hand it over to Dave. But the agenda will give an introduction to PVSC. The assessment will be an assessment overview. We'll have a talk about the cap, and then we'll get into the 2021 assessment roll, and we'll look at CBRM's assessment profile. We'll talk a little bit about the appeal and the inquiry period, which has just ended. And then we'll just review the assessment notices that were sent out in January. So PVSC stands for Property Valuation Services Corporation. We are an independent, not-for-profit organization. We were formerly part of Provincial Department of Municipal Affairs. In 2007, we became a corporation, not-for-profit. We are municipal funded and paid for by the 49 municipalities in Nova Scotia, and our mandate is to provide assessments for those municipalities across Nova Scotia. A couple of things that are our responsibilities is we deliver assessment rolls to all 49 municipalities on December 31st of each year. We have approximately 634,000 assessment notices that go out every January. And we administer the CAP assessment program for eligible residents of Nova Scotia. Some of the things that we don't do, and we often get questions on, are we don't set tax rates, we don't collect taxes, we don't create tax policy, and we don't provide tax relief. I'll now have Dave Penny, the regional manager, go through the operational cycle for assessment and a profile for CBRM's assessment role for 2021. Dave?
Thank you, Lloyd. So our operational cycle, we start in January. We mail out 634,000 assessment notices to property owners in Nova Scotia. There's a 31-day inquiry and appeal period. It started January 11th and it ended February 11th at midnight, so last Thursday. In February, we start to review the assessment appeals, and we also mail out the income and expense forms. In March, we start to finalize sale reviews for the up and coming assessment rolls, so the 2022 assessment year. And in May, we wrap up the provincial reassessment for 2022. So 2022, we'd be looking at sales that occur in the calendar year of 2020. And in September, we start looking at all the building permits we receive from the municipalities. We start to consult with commercial property owners and agents. And in December, we mail out the assessment roll and year-end reports to the municipalities by the end of the calendar year, December 31st. So how we determine property value? The Nova Scotia Assessment Act requires that we assess property at market value. So market value would be the amount which, in the opinion of the assessor, would be paid if the property was sold on a date prescribed by the director in an open market with a willing seller and a willing buyer. So there's many factors that affect market value, and some of the data that we look at would be the type of property, the size of the property, the location. When you're talking real estate, you continuously hear location, location, location. Land influences, so water frontage is big demand stuff, water view. Building size and style factors in, construction quality, good quality contractor compared to me building your home, which would be scary. The effective year and condition also affect value, so depreciation factors in as well to get to that market value. We gather data from a large group of sources. We're continuously talking to property owners, and we want to talk to property owners. The Nova Scotia Land Registry system, we get affidavits of value. We use POL, the their mapping features. The deed section, we're looking at that all the time. We do sale reviews on all properties that sell. We also use a large group of real estate websites such as Viewpoint, MLS, and then individual company websites as well. We even go to Kijiji or any other private sites where you may see property listings to have a view at those. We do review all building permits in Nova Scotia. And like I said earlier, we do the income and expense surveys. We look at the building cost data. We use an aerial flyover, pictometry, which the municipalities also have access to. It'd be in the middle photo there. That's one of the tools we do use. And field inspections. The type of valuation we do would be called mass appraisal, which is the valuing of a large group of properties as of a given date using our common data and standardized methods, and then testing it with the statistical measures. So we use that to value all the properties in Nova Scotia, and we analyze a full year of sales data and a variety of property characteristics to determine the assessment based on market evidence. So the difference between your fee appraisal and your mass appraisal, fee appraisal would be if you were buying a property or refinancing a property, the appraiser would come out, he'd look at a single property at a time and give you 3 or 4 comparables compared to where we're doing mass appraisal. That would be the difference there. And the CAP program overview. So the CAP program is legislated by Section 45A of the Nova Scotia Assessment Act. And we administer the act based, or the CAP program based on behalf of the Nova Scotia government. The CAP basically caps the property on a annual increase in market value based on the Consumer Price Index. The cap is removed when a property is purchased unless it's an eligible family transaction. And it's placed back on the property after 1 year if the property is eligible. If the property sells in 2021, this year, the property wouldn't be eligible for the cap in 2022, but it would be eligible for the cap in 2023. The capped amount this year would be 0.3%. And some of the eligibility criteria would be at least 50% owned by a Nova Scotia resident, ownership remaining within the family, residential property, and also dwelling units less than 4. Some key dates for the 2021 assessment roll. So for the 2021 assessment, we would look at sales that occurred in the 2019 calendar year with a market value of January 1st, 2020. And we'd look at the physical state of the property as of December 1st, 2020. So COVID-19 happened in March of 2020. So that will be analyzed for the 2022 assessment roll. So currently we are looking at the sales for the 2020 calendar year. And like I said earlier, the notices were mailed out January 11th, and the deadline was midnight of February 11th. The overall assessment roll for the province. Total assessment value, 114.6 billion across 634,000 accounts. far as activity, we looked at 14,000 permits, 6,500 appeals in 2020, and we reviewed 41,000 sales, and we had 29,500 inquiries. The residential assessment was up 3.59% in the province, roughly $8.9 billion. The commercial assessment value, 24.8 billion, and that was up roughly 0.75%. CBRM profile, total assessed value, 6.9 billion, 64,669 accounts. As far as activity, a little over 1,000 permits, 1,246 sales, 443 appeals in 2020. Right now, we're down 17% in CBRM for 2021. We're at 373, so those numbers could change a little bit, but right now we're at 373. And we had 1,500 inquiries in 2020. The residential assessment roll was up 1.85%, which valued at 5.37 billion across a little under 61,000 accounts and 4.44 billion in cap. The commercial assessment value was down 0.25%. The value would be 1.54 billion total and 3,700 accounts roughly. A few of the highlights for CBRM. Residential market and bedroom communities is still steady. It's been trending that way for the past few years. Apartment values increasing across Nova Scotia due to the low vacancy rate. Similar trends in commercial as previous years. In the commercial side of things, construction is the driving force for the most part. Hotels and motels are fairly unchanged. Low vacancy in offices and retails is softening the further the properties are away from urban centers. If we're looking at, looking at commercial change or residential changes in the former MUs, Cape Breton County, residentially up 1.8%, Sydney 2.3%, Dominion 2.4%, Glace Bay 1.5%, Louisbourg 0.1%, New Waterford 1.2%, North Sydney 1.7%, and Sydney Mines at 1.9%. A little bit of the numbers for the profile for CBRM. Total residential was up 1.85%. Taxable residential was up 1.91%. Exempt residential was down a little more than 0.25% at 2.8%. Residential with the cap was up 2.03%. The total commercial was down 0.26%. The taxable commercial was up 0.79%, and the exempt commercial was down a little over 1%. The inquiry and appeal period, like I had said, that would run from January 11th to February 11th of this year. So it ended Thursday night at midnight. We do have our offices closed to the public right now, but we are open for appointments. If somebody wants to meet with us, we'll gladly meet with them at the office. Property owners, we encourage them to review their assessment notice and contact us if they have any questions at all. Even though the appeal period is passed, we still want to talk to those property owners. So if you get any inquiries at all, pass them on to us and we'll gladly talk to them. The appeal forms were on the back of the assessment notices. All appeals would have to be signed, and they could have been submitted by mail, fax, email, or one of our secure drop boxes, which were in 5 locations across the province, in Dartmouth, Wolfville, Truro, Tuscot, and Sydney. A little bit on how to read my assessment notice. The notice has number of dwelling units, the municipality that the property is located in. It contains your assessed value with a market value, like I said earlier, of January 1st, 2020, and the physical state of the property as of December 1st, 2020. It will have the capped assessment if the property is eligible for the cap. It will also have the taxable assessed value, which would be the lower of the two if it was eligible for the cap. And the acres would be populated if the property contained forest property. It would have the number of acres in there, and that's due to the fact that forestry property would be taxed at 25 cents per acre. Your assessment notice is available online. You can look at my property report. You'd have to put in your account number and the PIN that would be also on your assessment notice to look at your property report online. You can also use the website to look at sales of properties. If you put in the municipality, community, the assessed value, sales, and the date that you're looking for would also have to be filled in. And that's pretty well the presentation. Our 1-800 number is here if you wish to contact us. Our website is there if you wish to have a look at the website, and also an email address. And that is everything.
Sorry about that. Thank you so kindly
Oh, you're very welcome.
for that presentation. Oh, I do have a dog here. So first on the speakers list, we have Steve Parsons looking to ask a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's just a simple question as it relates to the clarification of within the family as far as the cap eligibility. Is that family as in immediate siblings, and or does it include extended family as cousins and so on and so forth? Thank you.
Mr. Parsons, that would be immediate family. So mother, father, children, brother, sister, grandparents, basically.
Thank you.
Cousins, okay, cousins wouldn't be involved in that.
Are there any other questions for PVSC at this time? Darren Bruckschwager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I do want to thank Greg and Lloyd for being here today. They're two of the valued employees at PVSC. I'm very pleased to serve on that board in capacity as governance and HR chair. And I can tell you that there's a ton of work done by the organization, and these two guys are busy. I know they'd be more than happy for counselors to get their personal numbers there at work. And I know that if you come across any questions from constituents, they would be more than pleased to contact them, or they can contact either or way. They'll make it work to make sure that the constituents got all the answers that they need. So I do want to thank you guys for being here today, and thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Jennifer Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor. I did just have one brief question. For properties such as hotels that are valued using the income-based approach, is the valuation determined based on income potential or actual revenues received during the year? And I ask that question only because of COVID and the impact that that has had on the operations of the hotels and what that will look like both for the municipality as far as, I guess, predictability of our tax revenues this year and next year versus the pressure that is going to put on our hotel industry.
So Jennifer, it's the actual income that is used. Every year we send out approximately 7,000 requests for financials to certain types of property homeowners that are done based on the income approach. So that'd be large apartment buildings, office buildings, shopping centers, and hotels. So the information that was used for 2021, of course, was information from 2019, which is before COVID. So any appeals that we would receive this year from hotel operators, if the issue is COVID, that will not have an impact on how we would address the valuation until 2022. So currently we are actually, I believe this week, just sending out the request to all the hotel operators in terms of getting their financials for 2020. And that information will be used for 2022. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
That's great. Is there anybody else who has any questions? Okay, seeing none. Again, our gratitude for always being there on the other line when we have questions. Council, I'm not sure if you're aware of the wonderful resources that we have and the intelligence of the folks from PVSC, but they legitimately are a phone call away and have been incredibly helpful, I know, in my experience on council. So I just want to say thank you for always being there and helping us as we move forward too as a municipality.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, stay safe out there.
You as well.
You too.
Take care.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
So looking at our schedule of conversations that we're going to be having, I'm impressed we're staying on schedule pretty great, actually. Next, we're going to be entering into a session regarding revenue. So Jen, that's you, right?
Yes.
All of the dollars.
Okay, let's see if I can make sure that I share the correct screen this time and that the slides advance. Okay. All right, did the slide presentation just change on your screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Okay, so before we get into the discussion on revenue, I did want to, I guess, provide a little bit of CBRM Taxes 101. When you go on our website and look up what our tax rates are under FAQ, you get this lovely, really convoluted, congested table of various different rates that are not necessarily easy to understand unless you work for a municipal government and are familiar with all the various service rate codes and the difference between residential, commercial, and the different sections of the municipality. So I did want to provide some background. While it looks complicated, it's actually very simple to understand once you know the mechanics of our actual tax rates. So first of all, the municipality starts with base rate taxes. So base rates are 91 cents per $100 of assessment for every area of CBRM, with the exception of Sydney Suburban. The base rate taxes for that particular area actually includes transit rate. So transit for Sydney is not levied as a separate area rate. Everybody pays that tax. It's embedded in their base rate. Same with commercial. Commercial base rate is $4.15 per $100 of assessment. However, transit is not embedded in that base rate. It's actually added separately. So that's a little bit, just slight variation between our approach to base rate taxes for residential and commercial. Then added to that is the fire rate. And the fire rate is determined based on the funding and the rate determination that was developed quite some time ago that factors in the number of residential properties and commercial properties that is serviced by a particular fire department, I guess the chemical makeup of that department. So whether that's fully career-based, which obviously is more costly and would require a higher rate of tax to generate the revenue required to pay for that level of service. And it also factors in the type of apparatus that may be required. So if you have a lot of high rises in a particular town or in downtown Sydney that may require, say, aerial apparatus, then that extra equipment would require, again, a higher level of tax rate in order to generate the revenue to pay for that particular specialty service or specialty apparatus. So that the base rate plus the fire rate is what the total base taxes represents on CBRM's property tax bill. The commercial rates, we have the base rate, and the fire rate is actually broken out separate on the commercial tax bill, but the base rate taxes that are included on the tax bill are identified, one line for base rate and one line for the fire area rate. And I did actually make an error in the residential. The total base rate taxes, including the fire rate for Sydney, is 1.37 cents. So I've just corrected that on this slide. Then if a commercial property is within the business improvement district in either Sydney or North Sydney, the commercial properties are then levied an additional BID levy or a BID commission. And those rates are actually set by the association and approved by their individual membership. We simply collect that revenue on the association's behalf. You'll see the expense side coming out of the fiscal and conditional transfers budgets. That's going to be presented later on in this afternoon. But this is included in the tax rates or a separate line item on commercial tax bill. If they're within those district boundaries, you would see that as a separate line item. Then we have service area rates, and these are proximity based. So if a property falls within 1,200 feet of a fire hydrant, they are levied the hydrant rate. If they are within 200 feet of a sewer line, they're levied the sewer rate. And if they're within 2,500 feet of a bus route, they would be levied the transit rate. So the hydrant rates are specifically set in order to recover the revenues required to pay to the water utility the amount that the UARB, or the Utility and Review Board, requires the municipality to pay the water utilities to supply water to the fire hydrants. That's required under legislation. So that particular tax rate is set to pay for that particular charge by the water utility. And that's over $7 million annually. And you will see that included in, I believe it's the fire administration budget in fire services that you'll see presented. I believe it's tomorrow. Then every property pays provincial tax rates. So those are tax rates set to pay for our mandatory contributions for education, housing, and corrections. We collect those taxes. It's 40 cents of our tax rate, of our total tax rate. And we collect those taxes and we send them to the province for our required services. There's a couple of other flat rate fees. One is minimum tax. So minimum tax is applicable on properties if there's a land and dwelling on the property. So it would not be applicable to mobile home parks, and it would not be applicable to seasonal properties. But if your primary residence, land and billing, the total assessed value times the tax rate is less than $500 in taxes, it's rounded up so that the minimum tax that any property with land and dwelling pays is $500. So that rate was last updated by council in 2018. Prior to that, the minimum tax was $400. It's not proposed to increase that this year, but we certainly will be looking at that in the future as our cost of living increases. We went a long time before we increased the minimum tax from $400 to $500, and we really shouldn't be letting those reviews go on as long as they do, because it just really, it creates a larger sticker shock when those rates go up. So we'll look at that probably within the next year or two. Acreage rates for both commercial forest property and resource forest property and the not-for-profit recreational acreage, those are set by legislation. They're embedded in the MGA. The acreage for the commercial and resource, the 40 cents and the 25 cents, that hasn't changed, and that's a standard flat rate. That doesn't change. There's no provision for CPI or anything in those rates. The the not-for-profit recreational acreage of $42.79 per acre, that increases by 5% every year under legislation. So that rate actually does go up. This is more of just a visual depiction of the previous slide, just to try to simplify it. This page is actually included in our community budget consultation material to residents. And you'll see all of our base rate services are listed on the right-hand side of this slide. So it includes our core services, administration, and as well as our amenities. So all of the base rates that everybody pays is included in this funnel or bucket. So fire rates, provincial rates, and base rate taxes, everybody pays. And then what gets added to that bucket are your proximity. So that could be any combination of any of those area rates that I described previously. So it could be sewer and hydrant. It could be only hydrant. It could be none of them if you live in rural areas like myself, or it could be all of them if you live in Sydney or the outskirts of Sydney. So all of those rates together comprise your total tax rate. Multiply that by your taxable assessment, and that is your tax bill that gets sent to you in the mail. So during our budget or our council orientation sessions, we did have a discussion regarding services for rural and non-rural residences. And there was reference to a document that tried to quantify the value of services and the revenue generated in serviced and unserviced areas. So I wanted to provide kind of a high level calculation, if you will, of where we stand with that. So as mentioned previously, all taxpayers pay for certain services. All of those services listed here. So policing and 911, fire, EMO, our provincial costs, libraries, all of our arenas and facilities, administration, handy trans, debt servicing. That comprises 90% of our total budget. So about $140 million of our $155 million operating budget. That budget being pre-COVID, before we had a look to see what our COVID losses and costs of COVID associated would be. Services for our serviced areas only would be your area rates that I mentioned. So hydrant charges, charges for sewer or wastewater, transit with the exclusion of handy trans, because handy trans is available to everybody, the BID levy, and I've also included crossing guards, although I'm sure there are areas where there are crossing guards in unserviced areas, but just for the sake of argument, I included that in service areas only. So when we look at the number of dwelling and commercial units in both non-rural and rural areas, 73% of our commercial and dwelling units are in non-rural areas. So non-rural areas is basically if a home or a property has access to any of the area rate services, so hydrant, sewer, or transit, they would be included in this number. So 73% of all of our units are in serviced areas, meaning 73% of the proportionate share of cost of service are assigned to those properties. On the other side, 27% of commercial and dwelling units are in the unserviced areas. When you look at what our tax bill revenue is, and you assign those municipal costs, rural areas contribute 25% of the total tax revenue towards the cost of municipal services. On the other hand, service areas contribute 75%. So it is actually quite proportionate to the cost of delivering services. Again, this is very, very, very high level. Commercial and residential exempt properties that we receive a grant in lieu, they're excluded from this calculation. However, the majority of those are in serviced areas. On the other hand, resource properties, we have about 3 million, or we'll get to that in a bit. We have several $1 million in resource tax revenue that's primarily from rural areas. So you can split hairs in a million different ways, but at a very high level, it's very proportionate to what tax dollars we receive from rural and the services that are provided to those areas. What isn't necessarily equal, though, is it is true that, you know, rural areas do pay high taxes, but what I guess is missed in the calculation is the proportionate share of taxes that actually gets remitted to the province versus what remains in CBRM. So this is an example of average residential assessment of $98,893. Their allocation, just base rate taxes only, 71.5% of their taxes stay within CBRM. A similar property with the exact same assessment value in North Sydney, 80% of their taxes, because there's additional, say, hydrant and sewer rates, just as an example. So the provincial rates on that, even though they pay the exact same amount of provincial taxes, the provincial taxes in the rural areas equate to almost a third of their total tax bill. So a third of their tax bill is not going to the delivery of municipal services, it's actually going to provincially mandated costs. So I think that's a very important point to note, even though that they do pay the exact same amount of provincial taxes in the rural areas, that represents a larger share of their total tax bill. I also wanted to provide this information. This came from CBRM's viability study, the comparative analysis memo that Grant Thornton had conducted. And this information is on our website, was presented in I think it started in December 2019. As you can see, it compares CBRM stats against other municipalities with comparable characteristics or similar taxation models and legislation. So we have HRM, St. John, Moncton, and Lambton County as a county in Ontario that the consulting firm chose as they had similar issues and similar characteristics as CBRM at the time. So what's important to note is that while CBRM is twice the geographic size of CBRM, they have 4.5 times the population and over 4 times more dwelling units paying taxes and an assessed value that is 2.5 times higher than ours. So of course, they're going to be able to have a tax rate that is significantly lower than ours. However, you can't necessarily judge tax rate and translate that into low tax rate being low taxes and high tax rate being high taxes. Because if you look, the average annual residential property tax bill in CBRM is $2,500 compared to $3,500 in HRM. And as a percentage of income, CBRM represents 4.4% of a resident's median household income, which is actually the lowest percentage of any of our maritime municipal unit counterparts that participated in this particular survey. There are obviously exceptions to that. However, that again, high level, these were the findings of the study. What I added over the weekend is a similar comparison on the commercial side, and I will send this slide to councillors once the presentation is over. And basically it compared commercial restaurants between Sydney and downtown Halifax. So yes, CBRM's commercial tax rate is very high, 5.25%. That is high compared to all of our other counterpart municipal units in the Maritimes. Our commercial to residential ratio, however, is the lowest, meaning that our commercial tax rate is set at 2.5 times that of the residential rate, where Halifax is 2.8%. So if you compare Sydney with 4 random restaurants, they're all located on Charlotte Street and the Esplanade. Halifax, we compared 4 random restaurants from Spring Garden Road, Grafton Street, and what was the other one? I forgot. Anyway, they're all in downtown Halifax. When you look at the square feet, see the hotels in Sydney have a significantly larger square footprint of both land and buildings. The taxes per square foot, even though we have a higher tax rate, is significantly lower than that in Halifax. And that's because the assessed values are significantly different. If you look at the first example, Restaurant A, you have an assessment value on 17,000 square feet of $247,000 versus in Halifax, a 12,600 square foot property being assessed at almost $1 million. So the taxes that they pay, they're almost double our taxes in Halifax for a smaller property because of the level of assessment, even though they have a significantly lower tax rate. All right, so that is it for our CBRM Taxes 101. I'm going to pause here for questions before we move into the numbers of our revenue budget. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, hopefully, and I'll be happy to answer any questions before moving on.
Thank you, Jen. Super helpful to have that background, I think, going into this conversation about revenues. So the first person on the list is Councillor Steve Gillespie. Go ahead, Steve.
Thanks very much, Mayor McDougall, and Jennifer, thanks for the presentation part of it. A couple of things about that I'll get on my soapbox regarding the Old County of Cape Breton versus the towns. First part of that is back in 2018, when we had this conversation about the minimum tax going from 400 to 500, there were a few councillors that, jumped up and shook their fists and said, oh, this is going to bankrupt people and, oh, it's going to be terrible. And of course, nothing came of it. Taxes need to go up. That's just the reality. But when we talk about a minimum tax at $500 a year, when you look at divided by 12 months, I mean, I think people pay more for their cell phones nowadays than they do for the taxation. And a lot of these individuals have homes that sit on these pieces of property. Now, if it's a vacant piece of property, I can understand there should be a minimum tax because a vacant piece of property doesn't generate anything for anybody. But when you have a dwelling on a piece of property, and I don't care what part of the CBRM you live in, there should be a minimum tax that is more reflective of the services that you're receiving. So if you live, outside an area such as Port Morion, and you live down an old vacant road, and you don't have sewer, and you don't have water, and a contractor plows your laneway or something, then I can understand somebody arguing, a $500. But if you live in an old town and you have, water and sewer and fire and police and garbage pickup and all that, I mean, I think we should be looking at a differentiation between what a minimum tax is and where that dwelling is and what types of services they have. As I said, people are paying more for their cell phones every month than they are for their taxes, first of all. Second, when we're comparing the rural versus non-rural, I personally don't like that comparison, because what do you say is rural and what do you say is non-rural? Because we do have two separate situations here where we have the old county of Cape Breton and the old towns and the old city. So are you saying that rural is everything in the old county of Cape Breton, Jennifer? Or are you talking about rural as being Myra, not Westmount? So that's a question.
Rural is defined for this analytic purposes as being anything that doesn't have a separate area rate associated with hydrant, sewer, or transit.
Okay, all right. Good to know that. And just, lastly too, when it comes to the comparison of CBRM to HRM, I know it's easier for us to do that, but a lot of people make that comparison, and I just don't think it's fair. The CBRM is nowhere near the size, the scope, the taxation base of HRM. And, for people to look at that, and it was very good comparison, Jennifer, and thank you for it. But for the average person to look at it, and we constantly have to defend how we do taxation to people, and we utilize Halifax for that because that's what people are saying. But the reality is Halifax is not in our league, or we're not in theirs. You know, the Annapolis Valley is probably a much better comparison for us, or that other town in Ontario that you utilize. So I'm glad you brought that up, Jennifer, just to show people that, you know, comparing ourselves to Halifax just doesn't make the numbers look right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Jen, did you have any comment on that?
No, I agree 100% with everything that Councillor Gillespie said. I agree. We see it in the news all the time, and we hear it from the public at our sessions about our high rates of taxes. You have to take it into context. Yes, our tax rates are high, but our assessment values are low. So overall, the tax bill comparison, they're paying significantly more taxes in HRM than we are paying here. And I think, as you see through our budget presentations throughout the next 3 days, we do a lot with the little bit of tax revenues that we do get. We structure our budgets as far as they can possibly go and deliver quite a very good level of service associated with that.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that.
That's great. Thank you kindly. Next on the speakers list, we have Steve Parsons, Councillor Steve Parsons.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jennifer, just a couple of questions. One for clarity, as it relates to what's quantified and described as Sydney/suburban on page 26 of 193. Would you quantify of not receiving water and sewer, let's say Howie Center, for an example. Would Howie Center be considered rural when you can make the comparison rural and non? Or is it /suburban, which is at a higher tax rate overall?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I will clarify that. Sydney suburban is an area that was specifically identified to, I guess, zone an area that is serviced by our career fire stations. That's outside of the distinct Sydney boundary. So, and that's not levied against residential properties. I believe it's only levied against commercial. So arguably, I guess at the time, there was a lot of urban sprawl going on where commercial properties were being set up in the Sydney River area, Grand Lake Road area, and they're establishing there. I'm sure one of the reasons why they were establishing there is because of the lower tax rate. So to try to even the playing field, council approved a separate zone of referenced Sydney suburban, which is basically a 40-kilometer radius from the Sydney fire station's response, because if the Mayflower Mall is going to catch on fire, it's not going to be only the Grand Lake Road Volunteer Fire Department responding to that. It's Sydney is absolutely going to be responding to that call. So that's what Sydney suburban is. That extends to a boundary within through to Sydney River Celtic Drive area. It doesn't go as far as Napoli Pizza. It stops at it's where basically wherever on Celtic Drive and Kings Road the sewer line stops. There's commercial properties. They would be charged the Sydney suburban rate. As for Howie Center, that would only be considered a serviced area if they're levied a sewer rate or a hydrant rate. So if my end of Floral Heights subdivision, for example, there are no additional services that I'm levied an area rate. So I would be considered in the rural category, not the non-rural category. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I'm just curious because when you look under understanding what you're getting for your tax rate on page 27, under core services, if you look at the 8 core services that we provide for everyone, outside of police, 911, a street light, which, you know, is questionable, does Handy Trans go into the rural areas?
Oh, yes, it does.
Okay.
Wayne McDonald, Director McDonald, will comment on transit services as part of the EPW presentation that follows at 11 o'clock.
Right. Okay. And my next notation would be on page 31. I like your comparison with the different areas. The only thing is, you know, when you look at the average single assessed value, if you look at our comparables, the properties are valued more. So I would suspect that they would pay more in taxes. I just want to make that point. We're a little bit lower than everybody else, but our assessment values are lower as well. So you would expect to pay more taxes if your property is worth more money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Darren Brookschwager is next.
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer, thanks for getting this commercial slide because it's a very important one. When I read Mr. Neil Naka's piece in the paper with the gentleman who bought Mike's restaurant in Sterling, I was really concerned. He said that they are leaving and the property taxes in Cape Breton are 4 times higher than anywhere else. So it is tight. That's the kind of stuff that makes it really tough for us in CBRM. That's the kind of language. So that's why I was looking for this here slide, because I want to set up a meeting with this kind gentleman who's investing in our community. So he certainly gets to understand what these tax rates really are. You know, we have people in CBRM that continue in the talk. There's no question our rates are higher, but our assessment is much lower. And if our assessment was as high as HRM, my gosh, we'd have a lot of money, but that isn't the case. So we're forced to charge those rates. So you really did 2 good slides here on the residential part of our taxes. We can see comparable in HRM residential, you know, $3,500 compared to the average of $2,500 in CBRM for residential. So you're actually paying less for the same type of home. You know, commercial, you just set up the slide there. I didn't have a chance, but the same thing, I guess, applies there. So I think these are important things, and we're going to have to show this a little more because we continue to have people out there. As late as today in the paper here, we're reading the same old story about our taxes being so much higher to live here, which just isn't correct. So we have to do more, I think, on to advertise this so that we can do more to attract business. And I think that's important. I think the slide, I know there was a similar slide done, I believe it was 2012 or 2013 by Marie, to show the differences in services, rural versus non-rural. And for me, rural was the former county of Cape Breton, who had a separate arrangement all along. And unfortunately for the CBRM, the service swap came in at the same time as amalgamation. And, you know, when that happened, right off the bat, policing costs became the responsibility of the municipality. Prior to that, policing costs in Nova Scotia, RCMP and rural were completely paid for by the province. And we know what the bill is now for policing, and we have to police the rural areas. So that really drove up the cost. And I hear the story. I have rural areas as well, and reserve mines and Gardner mines, and in their opinion, there's only a garbage bag picked up here. That's what they feel their service is. So this is a great slide. I appreciate the efforts to really put together the this here to date here, because like I said, it's understanding the tax rates in CBRM. It's a very important topic, and we need more people to invest here for sure. So let's get this message out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm glad that you actually mentioned that, because when it comes down to how we fund the infrastructure that we are responsible to provide to the residents, it does come down to creativity when it comes to economic development and population strategies. So I'm pretty happy that that's going to be a big part of our strategic planning coming up, and we'll have some fine folks coming to help us with that. Are there any other questions? Okay, so Jen, do you want to continue, or do folks want to take maybe 2 minutes, 5 minutes tops to just top up your coffees or anything, stretch your legs for a second, and then we'll come back and continue on with Jen's presentation?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So we will, oh, sorry.
I'd love a cup of tea, so yes.
Go grab a cup of tea, stretch your legs. We're in for 3 long days in front of the computer, so we have to be mindful of our screen time and breaks. Okay, so we'll say at 10:45, is that okay, Jen, that we'll reconvene?